Now, one of the most innovative and unique mechanics to ever come out for a tabletop RPG game was the Masterdeck, which was a set of cards that was released by West End Games to be used in conjunction with its MasterBook system. Now, if you recall from last episode, and hopefully you were here, we had an in-depth tutorial of the MasterBook system where we showed you how to create characters, get skills, engage in combat, and this kind of thing. But in today's episode, what I want to do is I want to go over the Masterdeck. I want to give it its own little episode here so that we can explore it in detail. So we're going to look at all the cards. We're going to see what they do, how they work. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you actually a little video that illustrates or shows you an example of how these cards are used in conjunction in the game in a set scenario. So with that, let's take a look real quick. Here is the Masterdeck. Now, this is available through Precise Intermedia. You can still order these. Here's the newer boxed version of the Masterdeck. There are 83 enhancement cards in this box. There's also 17 subplot cards, which are the red cards, 5 color cards, and 3 blank cards. And we're going to look at all of these shortly. Now, one thing, though, I do need to mention is that within the MasterBook system, it's a little bit different than other RPGs because we have these things called acts and scenes. Every adventure is divided into acts, and typically there's about 3 of them, which, just like a movie, something major happens within those acts. And inside of those acts are scenes. And think of scenes as like encounters in Dungeons and Dragons, right? There like might be combat, there might be some sort of interactive scene of some kind that's important. And like I said, typically there might be like 2 or 3 scenes within an act. And there's 2 types of scenes within the MasterBook system. There are standard scenes, which are denoted with an S, as we'll see on the cards. And there's also dramatic scenes. Dramatic scene is like the climax to some adventure, some epic battle, like in James Bond, where, the MI6 is fighting against, Spectre's men. Some big climactic scene that kind of wraps everything up. Now, in the MasterBook system, if you want to use the Masterdeck, players will start with a certain number of cards based on how many characters are going to be inside the adventure. So, for instance, if there's only one player playing, he or she will have 5 cards. If there's 2 to 5 players, there will be 3 cards. And if there's 6 plus, each person will get 2 cards. Now, in the game, and I'm going to return to this slide in a moment, there are something called in-round and out-of-rounds activities or engagements. And there's different types of rounds. So if we go over here to the interactive and attack skills matrix, we'll see on here on the far right, it's kind of hard to see because Vincent's his head's up there, but you see that it says C or CI or IN there for the different types of rounds. Thank you, Michael. So for instance, martial arts, right? If you look, it says rounds, it says C. So martial arts is used in a combat round. But if you look down at the interaction skills, like intimidation or confidence, those might be in combat rounds or they could be in interaction rounds. And finally, we have something called an N, which is just like completely out of rounds. It's just whenever something can happen during the game. Now, if you recall from last episode, we have difficulty numbers that we roll against in the game. Now, the difficulty number might be arbitrary. Let's say it's, I don't know, climbing up a cliff face or something like that. And then the game master has to set a number that you have to beat by rolling, using your skills, getting a bonus number and beating the number. But there's also opposed rolls in the game. So for instance, if I want to intimidate somebody on the interaction skills here, I'm going to be rolling using my intimidation skill against the target's willpower or their confidence. Or let's say I'm trying to perform a trick. I'm trying to trick somebody. Also, that will go against their willpower or their intellect. And there may be a general success table that we look at depending on what we're trying to do. For instance, if I'm trying to charm somebody and it says here charm or charisma, I'm going to go against their willpower. I'll roll, get a bonus number. I'll see the result points that I get, and I'll compare it against the general table, and it might say something like good result. And then it's the GM's or the the GM's discretion there to tell you how well you've succeeded. So, maybe you're trying to charm the hotel hostess into giving you access to a room upstairs of, one of your enemies. And she, if you just get like a good success, she might kind of go along with it, or you might have to work a little more. So again, this is the interactive and attack skills table. Now back to hand versus pool. Now, when you are not in round by round action, which means you're not in like combat rounds, players can play cards from their hand at any time. So they may play any number of cards and trade cards with other players during those conditions when they're out of rounds. But if players are in rounds, the players must pick up their cards into their hand. So there's two different things here. There's hand versus pool. So the second combat starts, I have to gather up any cards that I have into my hand, and then those have to be played from my pool. Now, how this works is, if you see here, it says after a character performs an action during a round, the player may place a card face up into his pool. So typically it's just right in front of you. And a player may play any card from his pool. He may not play it from his hand. Now, likewise, as we're going to see a little bit later, you can also trade cards with other people at the table, but you trade from the pools, not to the hand. So for instance, if I want to give Sally a +1 action bonus from a card in my pool for her character to do something, I have to trade it with her from a card that's in her pool, right? I can't just give it to her in her hand and then she plays it immediately out of her hand, right? It has to be those cards have to be in play, right, within people's pools. We'll see more about that in a moment, especially during the example I have. Now, there's also this thing called playing for the critical moment. Now, in this scenario, a player declares that he's going to basically play as many cards as he possibly can. It's kind of a last-ditch effort to do something spectacular. But when doing that, which will work, you can do that. You'll lose any cards from your hand that you're not playing from the pool. So you're discarding all the cards. Now, discarding brings us to this, which is the piles. Very straightforward here. The first thing we have is our master deck, right? It's just the card deck we pull from. Then we have the discard pile. After we play a card from our pool, it goes into the discard pool. And we also have the initiative pile. I'm going to talk about how these initiative indicators work in just a moment, because the first thing I want to talk about is how the enhancement cards work. So the first types of cards that we have to look at, and there's like 83 of them in the deck, are the enhancement cards. So here's a couple examples. Every card in the master deck has a number. So for instance, the number 1 here, the number 6 over there, and this first one here says action. So this card gives me +1 bonus to any action. Now, this other card here says adrenaline. It's also an enhancement card, and that gives you +3 to the action value of dexterity, strength, endurance, toughness, right, agility, or a related skill. So you can kind of choose. So that's very, very helpful. Now, on that card, you're also going to see there's this thing called an initiative section. And it starts with either an S or a D. So in that red section there, you see how it says S colon and then it says P colon and there's like G colon. That is the initiative card. Now, cards aren't simply played out of the hands or pools of players. The GM also uses the master deck to determine initiative and conditions that may come up during initiative. So in this first example here on the left, the action card, we see that it says S for standard scene and P for players. So if the players are on the left there, P, that means that they go first. They have initiative. The G stands for game masters, characters that he's controlling or monsters or could aliens, it could be anything, right? And he goes second in this scenario, and his characters he's controlling are fatigued, which means they're going to take 2 shock damage. Now, other results can come up there too. For instance, you see flurry. In a flurry condition, the side that gets that can take 2 actions, and they can also, like if it's the player characters, they can put 2 cards into their pool during a flurry round. Or we see on the right there, inspiration. Now, inspiration, the side winning this initiative removes all KO, remember knockout, that from last episode, shock and knockdown effects immediately. So this is great. If the GM pulls this, and let's say the players are all battered, and they got a couple characters are down, they're unconscious, and they've suffered shock damage. If they get inspiration, they remove all of that immediately. Now, I will clarify here though, fully unconscious characters, right? They're totally unconscious. They wake up, but they do remain knocked down. And remember, knocked down gives you -4 to all your rolls. But you remove a K or an O shock and knockdown effects immediately if you are not completely unconscious. And players receive a card at the start of next round with inspiration. Other examples might be, which are not on these cards, but might be setback, like your gun jams, stymied, if you remember this from last episode, which is you lose your first roll again. Up. Now, an up condition means that this side gets to roll both dice again, and it cannot be canceled by the other side using a life point. So that's a good one. Or one that's specific to the Game Master's characters only, which is breaks. Now, if a breaks condition comes up, the GM's characters will run away if they do not inflict damage on the PCs or dramatically improve their condition. So it's almost like a morale failure by the enemy or the monsters or this kind of thing. Now, what other types of enhancement cards are out there? There is a leadership card, where a player can take 2 cards from his pool and he can put it into other players' pools. And he then takes 2 new cards from the deck. So that's a really good one if you have leadership to use it at a critical moment. Seize initiative. The player can use this to force the GM to pull another initiative card. Right? So you can lay that down to if things are bad and the GM's got to pull another initiative card. Or you can keep the same one for the following round. Now, a special one is opponent fails. Now, this card means that you can cancel an action by basically making your enemy fail, but it affects you only. You can't use this in conjunction with other players or give this to another player to cancel out an action, right? This is kind of for you only. There's also a supporter, and this must be thrown while the other player is performing an action, and this provides a +3. So think about it this way, guys. Magic the Gathering, how you have instants. It's kind of like that, where you're throwing down an instant at a critical moment, even if it isn't your turn, in this case, with the master deck. So with a supporter card, you can give another player +3 to an action. Now, why is this great? Because unlike almost virtually any other RPG out there, this game using these cards allows people at the table to do things when it is not their turn. So you're not waiting, you're not taking an action and then waiting 20 minutes before it comes back to you to do something. So this is unique. And you can trade cards with other players. You can kind of strategize to figure out how you're going to use these cards in the course of the adventure. And it can be a lot of fun. It can really speed things up. So let's do this. Let's take a quick look at how this, to give you an idea of what this looks like in a given short scenario. Take a quick look at these cards and how they operate actually within the context of a game with a very quick example. So in front of us here, we have a necroscope setting character, Edward Lancaster. He's an E-branch agent from Britain. And we'll notice that under his dexterity, which his base rating is 8, he has fire combat skill of 9. And he's using a 45 auto pistol that does damage 19. Now in his hand, he has 2 cards. He has this guy right here, Adrenaline, which gives him +3 to the action value of dexterity, strength, endurance, toughness, agility, or a related skill. So he can choose from among those. It's a pretty powerful card. He also has willpower here, which gives him +3 to the action value of any mind, intellect, or related skill. For purposes of this example, let's say he's going up against a couple KGB agents in a subway station, and they got into a firefight. So they're firing pistols at each other with Edward using his 45 here. So he's going to want to use one of these cards, but they're in his hand right now. So the first thing that has to happen is that the game master is going to produce an initiative card. And in this case, we see for standard scene, S, we see the players are going first, but Edward is fatigued, so he takes 2 shock points damage. So I go up here, and I'm going to mark that down on my sheet, right? I've taken 2 shock points. But the good news is that Edward is able to go first, right? He's able to shoot at the agents before they shoot at him. So what he's going to do, let's pull this aside for a moment, and let's discard this, not discard it, but pull away this willpower card because we're not going to use that. Okay? We do want to use this adrenaline card, but the first thing that has to happen is that Edward has to do an action this round before he can actually put this card into his pool. So let's just, for purposes of the example, let's say he is shooting using Fire Combat 9 at the agent who has a dodge value of 11. So we roll here. He rolls a 9. And on the bonus chart, you see at the bottom of the screen there, on the bottom of the character sheet, you see a bonus chart value for 9 would be 0. He does not get any additional help here, which means he misses the KGB agent. But he's able to take this adrenaline card and he's able to put it in his pool for next round. And he indicates that to the GM. So next round, let's say that the enemy shoots at him and misses. So we go into the next round. A new card comes into play now. And again, we see that the players have 1 initiative. And this time, Edward has the option to use this adrenaline card. And he can use it before he shoots or after he shoots. So he is going to, again, roll the dice. And let's say he wants to add to this because he's not sure what he needs to hit. And remember, a higher total might get him more result points. So he is going to tap this guy. He's going to give him +3. So now he has 11 here, right? So that gives him 14. And on the bonus chart, the 14 gives him a bonus of 3, which is a 12 total, which beats the dodge of the enemy agent by 1. So then he looks at, he's going to calculate his damage, right? He's going to add that result point to his damage, which gives him a 20. And then we're going to subtract 9 from that to get 11. So that the actual result ultimately will be against the enemy agent 2 wounds a K or an O, and 5 shock damage. So this is an example of how these cards work. Now remember, after this card is used, it's going to go into the discard pile until the end of the scene where Edward can actually, well, the player can actually draw new cards to replenish. So that's just a quick example. Okay, so there are other enhancement cards. Obviously, there are, for instance, there's a haste card, which allows you to do an extra complex action. There's also a double cross, which I'm looking at here. This gives you +6 to any action performed that directly betrays the rest of the party. So that's kind of a wild card. So there are a lot of enhancement cards that you can use to really spice up the game. But that's not all, because we also have these things called subplot cards. And let me pull these up. Now, the subplot cards operate differently. They're sometimes called the red cards, and they may come up during the course of the adventure. You may, when you're replenishing your cards, you might pull it from the deck, and you might get one of these subplot cards. I think there's 17 of them, so there's not that many, but they do come up. And these are handled a bit differently. So when they do come into play, and sometimes they come into play right away, you put them down in front of you, and they stay there until the GM determines that they come into play. So for instance, if we look at this one that says alertness, it says you notice a previously unseen item, a character or clue. So you set this card out facing the GM. So the GM will basically say, hey, you know, this character is very, very alert. So he's going to notice something. I just have to choose when. Another one might be something like on the right here, suspicion. The character is suspected of being guilty of an act that he may or may not have performed. So those are interesting subplots that can come up. Other ones include personal stake. If the PC completes a mission, he gets 2 life points, gets additional life points if he has this personal stake card in play and he completes the mission. Or this one is really wild, and this is the craziest thing ever, the martyr card. After every act, remember I talked about acts, the PC gets a life point, but he or she must sacrifice his life at basically the end of the adventure to save everybody somehow. So it's like, you know, the martyr card is almost kind of like a death sentence in some ways. It's kind of a wild card. So there's also nemesis, romance, mistaken identity. These subplots can really kind of throw curveballs into the adventure, but if you're ready for them and you know how to prepare for them as a GM, they can be really fun to throw in. Now, there are also these things called picture cards. Let me bring these up real quick here. Now, the picture cards, they're kind of like wild cards. There's 4 of them, I think, in the standard deck. And the picture cards, you know, they do crazy things. For instance, the wild card can be used as any other numbered card in the deck. So if you as a player gets the wild card, right, you basically can choose. You can say, hey, I want to use card number 71, which is, I don't know, let's say haste. Okay. Or there's another card called Interloper, which you can see there. This is played as a subplot card, and at some point, a third party is introduced. That third party typically helps the PCs, or maybe not, right? We don't know. It's GM's discretion. And then, of course, the ones that are real self-explanatory are the disaster and opportunity cards, right? Disasters, something horrible happens, right? And then, of course, an opportunity card gives you some kind of opportunity in the course of the game. There are also blank cards that the master deck gives us, where we can, as a GM, we can go in and we can create our own. We can say, hey, I want to create a new enhancement card. And the first thing that came to mind for me with these kind of blank ones, were for, like, for instance, the World of Aiden fantasy setting where I want to do something mystical. So for instance, a curse, something like that, or something that gives you some sort of magical bonus, right? Which you don't really find those too much in the regular deck, right? So it could be something specific to that setting. Now, the last thing I want to discuss is this thing called critical skill resolution. And what I'm going to do for that, let's go back to the enhancement cards just for a moment here, because you'll see in the center of these cards, there's two words there. One says complication, another one says critical problem. And let me do this too. Let me hold up. Let me just let me do this. Let's go to. Let me hold this up. If you look on this card, it's actually kind of turned around, but it says skill AB on there. In the same location as this card here where it says complication and critical problem there in the middle. What this is it's entirely optional, but the GM can put together a list of tasks that need to be accomplished in order to complete some kind of objective. And there will be some sort of time limit imposed. This is almost always used in dramatic scenes. So, for instance, breaking into a train car, finding a nuclear bomb inside a locked box, and then defusing it within 10 minutes. What the GM is going to do is he's going to put those actions under A, B, C, and D. Any player can complete one of those actions, but they must be done in order. And they're done based on the initiative cards that are pulled. So for instance, if I pull an initiative card as a GM and it says AB on there, only actions AB can be completed. The party is going to have to wait before it can do C or D. So it's basically what you're doing here is you're adding a real challenge to the game. Another example would be like disabling a bank security system, cutting a hole in the roof, rappelling down the elevator shaft, and then breaking into a safe. But there are some complications to all this, and we're going to see them right here. In the middle there, we don't have, in that white section, we don't have A, B, C, or D. We actually have the words complication or critical problem. A complication is if the PC fails, a +1 is added to the difficulty of all the remaining tasks. So some sort of screw up is going to make everything more difficult. Or critical problem. If the PC fails the task, he must come up with a new way to accomplishing it using a different skill. So that could be really, really difficult. Or a possible setback. A failure causes the PC to go back one level. So let's say you've already accomplished A, now you're on B, you mess up B, and you're going to end up back at A. Another thing you can do is a last-ditch effort with a multi-action penalty, which gives you +2 difficulty number to all rolls to basically go all out to try to accomplish all this stuff if time is running out. So those are the critical skill resolution. So remember, guys, you have your enhancement cards where you basically have your bonuses of some kind, and some of them may be a little wacky. You have your initiative area with standard or dramatic scenes. And then finally, the last thing I want to talk about is how you can get additional cards. And this is by performing, if you see in the bottom of these cards, an approved action. Now, an approved action, which appears on the initiative card, basically lists something like, let's say, attack or defend, intimidate, something like a trick, maneuver, something along those lines. And if you successfully complete those, you can get a new card, right? So that you get awarded a new card, and it goes in your hand, not your pool. And also, like I said in the video, at the end of a scene or the end of an act, you replenish your cards, right? So let's say if you're in a 6-player game, and let's see if we go back to here, right? A A 6-player game means each person has 2 cards, so you would replenish it by taking 2 cards from the deck, right? If you had 2 players, and then it would be 3. So this is the master deck and how the whole thing works. It's a lot of fun. It's obviously a little more to keep track of as a GM, but I highly recommend using it when you're running MasterBook games because it really spices things up and can be a lot of fun. So if you love this content or even like it, just like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next episode. When probably we'll talk about maybe Tales of the Crypt or one of these settings for MasterBook, and we'll get deep into those. So thanks again.